This program is brought to you by SMC Infrastructure, building a better world.
Hello, Mga Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic. And as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. Here are tonight's news. The death of unarmed black man George Floyd in the U.S. police custody has triggered outrage worldwide and reignited debate over colonial-era monuments. Take a look. Now, opinion has been divided over the legacy of the slave merchant and later philanthropist. In Antwerp, Belgium, a defaced statue of King Leopold II is taken down. His brutal colonial rule in Belgium's African colonies is a source of controversy, and authorities will restore the vandalized monument, but they say probably it will not be returned to a public pedestal. In the United Kingdom, a statue of slave owner Robert Milligan comes down after activists called its presence a focus of anger. Local authorities say they will review other monuments in the area. In Oxford, thousands called for the statue of 19th century British imperialist Cecil Rhodes to be removed, and critics accuse Rhodes of racism in South Africa. Meanwhile, a statue of Christopher Columbus in Boston has been beheaded, according to police, as calls to remove sculptures commemorating colonizers and slavers sweep America on the back of anti-racism protests. Take a look.
I don't condone destroying public property. I understand everyone has high emotions right now due to what's gone on. But there's a way of going about things, and if somebody wanted the statue removed, it could be done legally.
So it seems like someone intentionally knocked the head off the Christopher Columbus statue here, and I think that's just all going off the momentum that's coming out of the Black Lives Matter protests, and I think that it's a good thing to capitalize on this momentum, because just like black people in this country, indigenous people have also been wronged, and I think this movement is pretty powerful, and this is really symbolic.
A Columbus statue was also vandalized in downtown Miami, and another was dragged into a lake earlier in the week in Richmond, Virginia, according to local reports. Italian explorer Columbus, long hailed by school textbooks as the so-called discoverer of the New World, is considered by many to have spurred years of genocide against indigenous groups in the Americas. He is regularly denounced in a similar way to Civil War generals of the pro-slavery South. The Boston statue, which stands on a plinth in the heart of town, has been controversial for years, like other Columbus statues across the U.S., and has been vandalized in the past. Dozens of American cities have, over the years, replaced Columbus Day in October, which became a federal holiday in 1937, with a day of tribute to indigenous peoples. But not Boston or New York, which have large Italian origin communities. Boston's Mayor Marty Walsh condemned the beheading but added that the statue would be removed pending a decision about its future, according to local media. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for the removal of 11 Confederate statues from the U.S. Capitol, part of a nationwide push to dismantle such memorials after a black man's killing in police custody sparked mass anti-racism protests. The top Democrat in Congress wrote to a bipartisan committee, quote, "Monuments to men who advocated cruelty and barbarism to achieve such a plainly racist end are a grotesque affront to these ideals of American democracy and freedom. Pelosi wrote, their statues pay homage to hate and not heritage. They must be removed. Now, some of the statues of men who led or participated in a failed secession against the United States during the Civil War are featured prominently in the Capitol. They include the bronze figure of Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederate States of America, and the marble statue of Alexander Stephens, who served as the Confederacy's vice president. Statues of the pair, who Pelosi noted were charged with treason against the United States, are on display in Statuary Hall, one of the most popular tour destinations in the Capitol building. A statue of General Robert E. Lee is one floor below, and House Speaker Pelosi pointed to reprehensible comments by Stephens in his 1861 cornerstone speech when he said the Confederacy was founded on, quote, the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, unquote. The brother of George Floyd, whose killing by police sparked worldwide protests against racism, made an emotional plea to the U.S. Congress to stop the pain and pass reforms that reduce police brutality one day after burying his brother in Houston. Take a look.
He was our gentle giant. I was reminded of that when I watched the video of his murder. He called all the officers, sir. He was mild-mannered. He didn't fight back. He listened to all the officers. The man who took his life, who suffocated him for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he still called them sir as he begged for his life. George wasn't hurting anyone that day. He didn't deserve to die over $20. I'm asking you, is that what a black man is worth? $20? This is 2020. Enough is enough. The people marching in the streets are telling you enough is enough.
George Floyd, 46, died in police custody in Minneapolis on May 25 when a white officer pressed his knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Video of the abuse went viral and protests, some violent, most peaceful, erupted from coast to coast in some of the most serious U.S. civil unrest in generations. The testimony came 2 days after congressional Democrats unveiled a package of sweeping reforms aimed at reducing systemic racism in U.S. law enforcement. The legislation seeks to end police brutality in part by making it easier to prosecute officers for abuse, requiring anti-racism training, and barring fired officers from working in police forces in other districts. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler said that while most cops were decent and law-abiding, he acknowledged the need to address a systemic problem in law enforcement that requires a comprehensive solution. Beijing on Thursday slammed a preliminary study by U.S. researchers at Harvard University that says the coronavirus may have circulated in China since August 2019 and calling it proof of a disinformation campaign. The virus first emerged late last year in the central city of Wuhan, but the U.S. has repeatedly accused China of a lack of transparency about the outbreak and its origins. The new paper by researchers at Boston University and Harvard, which has not been peer-reviewed, analyzed photos of parking lots at Wuhan hospitals and search trends on the Chinese search engine Baidu. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said she believed the study was evidence of coordinated efforts in the U.S. to, quote, deliberately create and disseminate disinformation against China. Take a look.
我想这应该是美方一些人协调组织、蓄意的制造和散播针对中国的虚假信息的一个新的证据，应该遭到国际社会的一致的谴责和抵制。但是就是这么一个漏洞百出、粗制滥造的所谓的论文，却让美方的一些政客和媒体如获至宝，大肆的传播，把它当成中方隐瞒疫情的一个新的证据。这种非常可笑的现象背后，它的 用意或者说操弄恐怕并不那么可笑。
The team led by Elaine Sosi at Boston University said they found a steep increase in volume starting in August 2019 at Wuhan hospital parking lots, culminating with a peak in December of 2019. And the authors also said that while they could not definitively confirm that the data they documented was linked to the virus, it supported conclusions reached by other research suggesting that the virus began circulating earlier than the first reported cases at the end of 2019. According to China's official chronology of the pandemic, the first cases of COVID-19 were spotted by doctors in Wuhan in December, and they shared the genome sequence with the World Health Organization in early January. Imperial College London, in collaboration with the WHO, has also traced the virus family tree, estimating that it appeared in China around December 5. Governments, including the US and Australia, have called in recent months for an investigation into the COVID-19's origins, with President Trump repeatedly pushing the conspiracy theory that the virus originated at a Chinese laboratory. On Wednesday, President Trump tweeted a Fox News video segment about the Harvard study without any additional comment. Prime Minister Boris Johnson rejected accusations that with Europe's worst death toll, his response to the coronavirus was lacking. Joining us live from the United Kingdom is Jennifer Ringwood. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, Alma.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
And it's good to see you.
Here's the update from United Kingdom. So, as you said, Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Wednesday defended what he called Britain's astonishing efforts to tackle the coronavirus, rejecting accusations that with Europeans' worst death toll, his response to the health crisis was badly lacking. Let's listen in.
You know, we made the decisions at the time on the guidance of SAGE, including Professor Ferguson, that we thought were right for this country. And I think that the questions that are posed are still unanswered, and there's a lot of data that we still, frankly, do not have. And of course, you know, we're going to have to look back at all of it and learn the lessons that we can. But frankly, I think that a lot of these questions are still premature, and there are lots of things, lots of data, lots of things that we still don't know. And this epidemic has a long way to go, alas, not just in this country, but around the world.
That is the whole point of having the scientific and medical method, is you look back and you say, what could we have done better and what can we do for the future? So we absolutely should. There's always a question of timing, and there's always a question of what do you do now, even in the middle of something. And be very clear, we are not at the end of this epidemic, not by a long shot. We're in the middle of it. And what do we actually wait till all the data comes in and we look back and say, these are the right things to do? So it's a fair question.
A top scientist who had advised the government said the death toll could have been halved and lockdown measures been introduced had lockdown measures been introduced a week sooner. More than 40,000 people are confirmed to have died from COVID-19 in Britain's outbreak so far, although figure rises to more than 50,000 when suspected cases are included. On either measure, the toll is second only to that of the United States, although each country has different reporting methods and lag times. And the pandemic is far from over. In Parliament, in what has been described as a testy exchange with his opponents, Johnson cited the astonishing achievement by the state-run National Health Service in building a string of emergency field hospitals, many of which were barely used. Now, if we think back to the earlier days of the pandemic here in England, a statement made by Neil Ferguson told a Parliamentary Science and Technology Committee hearing the pandemic was doubling every 3 to 4 days before the lockdown interventions were introduced. So, he says here, had we introduced lockdown measures a week earlier, we would have reduced the final death toll by at least half. On March 13th, the government's scientific advisor team concluded with near certainty that a lockdown such as that introduced in China at the time will cause a peak. Asked about Ferguson's comments, Johnson said it was premature to reach definitive conclusions. He told reporters there is too much we do not know. Pushing ahead with his gradual lockdown easing, Johnson confirmed that all remaining shops would reopen starting next week and that single adults could form a support bubble with one other household. But his decision to reopen zoos and wildlife parks from next Monday and failure to ensure the immediate return of children to school in England before the summer holidays in July faced ridicule across the political spectrum. What we will be doing is a huge amount of catch-up for our students in the summer months, Johnson told reporters after being asked why children would be allowed to see lions and not school teachers. We do fully intend to bring all the children back to school in September, provided the progress we are making continues. He added, Runnymede Trust Race Equality Think Tank by Zubaydah Haq told a parliamentary hearing that home lessons were hurting disadvantaged children, the most because of the lack of access to computers, or they go to schools with less developed online programs. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Jennifer, in last night's briefing of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he also talked about forming support bubbles. Can you tell me what this is or about this?
It's a funny term, isn't it? Okay, so to clarify, my understanding from watching the BBC and other news sources today is that this is intended to help people living with their own issues of loneliness and isolation. Unfortunately, those in the shielded group, you can't have a support bubble where you can meet another household. You still have to keep away from everybody. The idea is that potentially two single people can stay at one another's homes. This also applies to a single grandparent being able to receive the family of a grandchild and seeing, so they can see their grandchildren again. And I think this is an exclusive I saw today. I think that was BBC with Fergus Walsh. He was the person that was talking about and explaining it. But again, if one person in that bubble, so in effect, those two households behave as if they are one. But if one in either of the two households gets sick, then both families in that bubble need to isolate for 14 days if they have any COVID virus symptoms.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your updates there in the United Kingdom. Looking forward to hearing from you again. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you, Alma. Thank you, Alma. From EBC United Kingdom, I'm Jennifer Ringwood, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, the number of confirmed coronavirus infections in the United States topped 2 million on Wednesday, according to a tally by Johns Hopkins University. The pandemic has claimed the lives of more than 112,900 people in the United States, which leads the world in the number of confirmed infections with 2,464,000, according to the Baltimore-based school's latest count. Meanwhile, just weeks ago, South Korea was celebrating its hard-won gains against COVID-19, easing social distancing, reopening schools, and promoting a tech-driven antivirus campaign. President Moon Jae-in has called K-quarantine. But as a resurgence now of infections in the Seoul region, where half of South Korea's 51 million people live, is threatening the country's success story. Health authorities are now warning that action must be taken to stop a second wave of infections. A total of 50 new COVID-19 cases, including 43 local infections and 2 fatalities, were reported by the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, raising the country's overall count to 11,902 with 276 deaths. Most have been in the Seoul metropolitan area, where health authorities have struggled to trace transmissions. Tougher quarantine measures have already been implemented in the capital area, which will remain in place until June 14. Authorities are warning that South Korea may have to roll back to strict social distancing if virus cases do not subside. Meanwhile, Singapore has approved the use of the antiviral drug remdesivir to treat seriously ill coronavirus patients, according to authorities, becoming the latest country to do so. The U.S. authorized the emergency use of remdesivir in hospitals at the start of May, followed by Japan and South Korea, while Europe has been considering following suit. It has been granted conditional approval in Singapore for treatment of some adult virus patients, such as those who require intensive breathing support, according to the country's health products regulator. The regulator, the Health Sciences Authority, said it had expedited the review of remdesivir given the urgent public health need during the COVID-19 pandemic. As a condition for the approval, the authority requires U.S.-based Gilead Sciences, which developed the drug, to collect safety data and monitor its use. Singapore initially kept the virus in check with a strict regime of testing and contact tracing, only for serious outbreaks to emerge later in dormitories housing low-paid foreign workers. The city-state now has the highest recorded number of infections in Southeast Asia, with nearly 39,000 cases, mostly among foreign workers. The death toll stands at 25. A top World Health Organization official clarified on Tuesday that scientists have not determined yet how frequently people with asymptomatic cases of COVID-19 pass the disease to others, a day after suggesting that such a spread is very rare. Now, the head of the World Health Organization told journalists that research is still ongoing to determine how the virus that causes COVID-19 can be transmitted by people who show no symptoms or asymptomatic of the disease. The UN agency has clarified information shared earlier this week, noting that there's still much to learn about the new coronavirus. Let's listen in.
Since early February, we have said that asymptomatic people can transmit COVID-19, but that we need more research to establish the extent of asymptomatic transmission. That research is ongoing, and we are seeing more and more research being done. This is a new virus, and we are all learning all the time. Communicating complex science in real time about a new virus is not always easy. But we believe it's part of our duty to the world. And we can always do better. We welcome constructive debate. And that's how science advances.
Although winter historically signals the start of flu season, the health experts are not yet certain how the new coronavirus will react under the same conditions. Similarly, there is no data on whether the virus will respond differently under summertime conditions.
Brazil, we have a lot of people. What we do know is that influenza viruses have a northern-southern hemisphere cycle, and we do know we're entering the cycle of the southern hemisphere influenza season. What we don't know is how the coronavirus is going to behave in the same situation. From Global. Right now, we have no data to suggest that the virus will behave more aggressively or transmit more efficiently or not. By no means is this over. If we look at the numbers over the last number of weeks, this pandemic is still evolving. It is still growing in many parts of the world, and we have deep concerns that health systems in some countries are struggling and they're under huge strain. We fully understand that governments are very reticent to go back into lockdowns which are potentially damaging to social and economic life. But at the same time, if that cannot be done and that is not appropriate and is not an avenue that governments want to take, there is so much more that can be done. And what we would like to see is the investments in those other things. It's not a matter of should we do lockdowns or should we not. If lockdowns are not possible or not appropriate, then there are many, many, many other things that can be done. And what we would like to see is the investments in those other things, particularly in investing at community level, in community-led surveillance, in early warning, in quarantine, and in all of the other measures. And people have spoken about flattening the curve. I don't particularly like that term myself. I'd rather we go for trying to be a bit more ambitious, not just spreading disease out over time, but as we do that, trying to reduce the ultimate impact of the disease, and actually not just flattening this thing down and experiencing it for a terrible amount of time, but at a level at which we can bear. But we're a little bit more ambitious in our public health objectives in trying to truly suppress the disease and do, like Maria said, countries like New Zealand have managed to achieve.
And now we will go to
Preliminary evidence from the earliest outbreaks indicated that the virus could spread from person-to-person contact, even if the carrier never developed symptoms. But WHO officials now say that while asymptomatic spread can occur, it's not the main way it is being transmitted. The virus is primarily spread via respiratory droplets when someone coughs or sneezes, or if they touch a contaminated surface, according to scientists. Asymptomatic transmission is particularly worrisome for public health officials, leading many to institute severe lockdowns and policies requiring masks in public. And that's because those patients never develop symptoms and in many cases don't even know they're infected. WHO officials say COVID-19 can also spread in the so-called pre-symptomatic stage, a few days before a patient shows symptoms. Epidemiologist Dr. Maria Van Kerkhoff said government officials should still focus on detecting and isolating infected people with symptoms and tracking anyone who might have come into contact with them. The WHO also revised its guidance on masks last week, saying they should be worn in public places, especially on public transportation and in densely populated areas. She acknowledged that some studies have indicated that there's been asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic spread in nursing homes and in household settings. In other news, floods and mudslides in South China have uprooted hundreds of thousands of people and left dozens dead or missing, according to state media. Take a look. The bad weather has wreaked havoc on popular tourist areas that had already been battered by months of travel restrictions during the coronavirus outbreak. Torrential downpours unleashed floods and mudslides that caused nearly 230,000 people to be relocated and destroyed more than 1,300 houses, according to official state news agency Xinhua, citing the Ministry of Emergency Management. In southern Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region, 6 people were reported dead and 1 missing. The local government said more than 1,000 hotels had been flooded and more than 30 tourist sites damaged. The extreme weather has dealt a hefty blow to the region's tourism sector, which is still reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic or epidemic. The Emergency Management Ministry said there were direct economic losses of over 4 billion yuan, or $550 million from the flooding, Xinhua reported. In Hunan province, at least 13 people were killed in rain-triggered disasters, and another 8 people are missing or killed in southwestern Guizhou province. That is according to the local emergency response departments. Xinhua said the heavy downpours began at the beginning of June and have led to dangerously high water levels in 110 rivers. Further rainstorms are expected in the next few days across the south. Eagle News will be right back.
The South Luzon Expressway, a 36-kilometer long road that runs from Alabang to Santo Tomas, Batangas, connects several commercial and residential areas in the Greater Manila and the provinces of Laguna, Cavite, and Batangas. This will soon be extended all the way to the province of Quezon.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
The global economy will contract at least 6% this year, with the unprecedented loss of income and extraordinary uncertainty caused by measures to contain the coronavirus outbreak, according to the OECD. In the case of a second wave of contagion later in the year, economic output could shrink by as much as 7.6%. It warned in both scenarios, recovery will be slow and uncertain. GDP growth should resume in 2021 by 5.2% if the virus is contained and 2.8% if there is another infection wave. That is according to the OECD. Let's listen in.
The economic front, the 6% decline in global GDP that we foresee in 2020 is larger by far than any we have projected in the 60 years since the OECD was created. Now, hundreds of millions have become unemployed, and now that is in the scenario where no second wave of infections happens. In the event that it would, this kind of double hit, the fall in global GDP would be over 7.5%. And we'd be looking at perhaps 40 million more unemployed. That presenting the problem as a choice between lives and livelihoods, meaning a choice between health and the economy, is a false dilemma. If the pandemic is not brought under control, there will be no robust economic recovery.
The policies for the recovery government designed today will shape our economies for years to come. Many economies need improved welfare systems, smarter regulation, better healthcare and education systems, more effective government, and better trade.
Policymakers moved decisively to cushion the blow to the economy while it was placed in what we could call an induced coma. But they now face the daunting challenge of quickly and completely reviving the patient.
The report warned that by the end of next year, the loss of income exceeds that of any previous recession over the last 100 years outside wartime, with dire and long-lasting consequences for people, firms, and governments. As unemployment rises, private debt levels in some countries are, quote, uncomfortably high, and business failure and bankruptcy risks loom large. In its previous outlook in March, by when the outbreak had hit China, but not yet the world's other large economies, the OECD slashed its global growth forecast by 0.5 percentage point to 2.4%, which would have been the worst performance since the 2008 financial crisis. Things have got considerably worse since then, with commerce and travel shut down as governments scrambled to rein in the pandemic by keeping people at home. The outbreak has nevertheless killed more than 400,000 people worldwide to date. Economic activity in the OECD's 37 developed member countries has collapsed. according to the report, by as much as 20 or 30% in some cases in what it called an extraordinary shock. As long as there is no vaccine or treatment against the coronavirus, it said physical distancing to prevent contagion, testing people for the virus, and tracing and isolating those infected will remain key to fighting the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve projected a solid rebound for the U.S. economy next year amid optimism that the worst of the coronavirus pandemic's disruptions has passed. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, however, cautioned that the outlook remains highly uncertain and both the central bank and Congress may have to do more to boost the recovery. At the conclusion of the two-day meeting, the Fed's policy meeting or policy setting Federal Open Markets Committee, or FOMC, confirmed it will keep the benchmark interest rate at 0 until the recovery is underway.
In March, we quickly lowered our policy interest rate to near 0, where we expect to keep it until we are confident that the economy has weathered recent events and is on track to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. With the easing of social distancing restrictions across the country, people are increasingly moving about, and many businesses are resuming operations to varying degrees. At the same time, many households have been receiving stimulus payments and unemployment benefits, which are supporting incomes and spending. Activity in many parts of the economy has yet to pick up, however, and overall output is far below earlier levels. Moreover, despite the improvement seen in the May jobs report, unemployment remains historically high. Weak demand, especially in sectors most affected by the pandemic, is holding down consumer prices. As a result, inflation has fallen well below our symmetric 2% objective. Indicators of longer-term inflation expectations have been fairly steady. The extent of the downturn and the pace of recovery remain extraordinarily uncertain and will depend in large part on our success in containing the virus. What the June SEP shows is a general expectation of an economic recovery beginning in the second half of this year and lasting over the next couple of years, supported by interest rates that remain at their current level near 0.
He declined to comment on what steps Congress should take, but said it's possible that we will need to do more, and it's possible that Congress will also need to do more. The Fed also said it will continue to work to ensure households and businesses have access to credit by continuing to purchase Treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities at its current state. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said after the meeting that the programs are providing financing where not otherwise available and also increasing the willingness of private lenders to offer credit. Japan's lower house of parliament approved emergency budget worth nearly $300 billion to help the economy after the coronavirus has tipped it into recession. Giving us that update, Dennis Liu joins us live from Japan.
Hello, Alma. Good evening.
Good evening, Dennis.
Yes, Japan's powerful lower house of parliament approved an emergency budget worth nearly $300 billion Wednesday, doubling the scale of measures to pep up the world's third biggest economy after the coronavirus tipped it into recession. Consumer spending has slowed to a crawl despite Japan's relatively low infection numbers and death toll from the pandemic, prompting the first economic downturn since 2015. In response, lawmakers approved a second exceptional budget of 31.91 trillion yen, or $297 billion, including subsidies for smaller businesses and cash handouts for medical workers. The budget bill will be sent to the upper house and is widely expected to be enacted as early as Friday. The cash to be raised by issuing bonds will also be used to help finance rescue programs and loans for struggling businesses. The government said the size of the package, including loans and investments, in addition to actual fiscal spending, is worth about 117 trillion yen, nearly the same size as the first extra budget enacted on April 30th. Combined with that initial stimulus package, Japan's total measures amount to 230 trillion yen when loan schemes are taken into account. Japan had recorded 17,251 coronavirus infections and 919 deaths as of Tuesday, a fraction of the toll seen in global hotspots. But a spike in infections prompted Abe to declare a nationwide state of emergency, handing regional governors the power to ask people to stay indoors and call for businesses to close. He lifted the emergency declaration last month, but said it would take quite a long time for the country to fully return to normal. The first extra budget that passed on April 30th included cash handouts for every resident and money to help boost production of much-needed masks for medical workers. So Japan is also restarting business trips to from other countries in the next few months.
Right. Can you tell me more about that? I know that currently Japan has a ban on more than 100 countries, and so Japan is now restarting some business trips. Can you tell me more about that?
That's right, Alma. Up to 250 business travelers a day will most likely be allowed into Japan from the 4 countries, which have seen their infection situations stabilize. Japan may start business trips to and from Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, and Thailand in the next few months. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said nothing specific had been decided, but Japan, which bans entry from more than 100 countries, would negotiate with the 4 countries with a view to a partial reopening in the summer. Business people such as executives and engineers will be given priority, with students and then tourists set to follow later. And then, depending on the situation, the government will expand the list later to other countries, including China, South Korea, and the United States. NHK said the Tokyo Metropolitan Government planned to advance its business resumption process to step 3 on Friday after holding talks with medical experts, allowing businesses such as video arcades and amusement parks to reopen. Back to you at the studio, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Dennis, for your updates. Looking forward for more. Stay safe, stay healthy, Dennis.
Thank you very much. Reporting live from Tokyo, Japan. This is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
A South Korean court declined to issue an arrest warrant for the heir to the country's Samsung empire over a controversial merger of 2 business units seen as a key step to his succession. Lee Jae-yong, vice chairman of Samsung Electronics, is already being retried on charges of bribery, embezzlement, and other offenses in connection with a corruption scandal that brought down former South Korean President Park Geun-hye. The merger case is separate from his ongoing retrial, but adds to the difficulties for the Samsung Group, by far the biggest of the family-controlled conglomerates or chaebols that dominate business in the world's 12th largest economy. Prosecutors had sought the arrest warrant for Lee on suspicion he was involved in price manipulation and illegal trading during the 2015 merger of Cheil Industries and Samsung C&T. But the Seoul Central District Court turned down the prosecution's request, ruling there was not sufficient probable cause for his arrest or those of 2 former Samsung executives. Meanwhile, German airline Lufthansa said that it would have to slash 22,000 full-time jobs as it predicts a muted recovery in demand for travel following the coronavirus pandemic. About 100 aircraft will remain grounded after the crisis, leading to, quote, a total of 22,000 fewer full-time positions in the Lufthansa Group, half of them in Germany, according to the company statement. The posts make up 16% of the Lufthansa Group's total workforce of 135,000. The airline said, however, that it would look at how it could use schemes for shorter work hours and other crisis arrangements to avoid outright redundancies. Without a significant reduction in personal costs during the crisis, we will miss the opportunity of a better restart from the crisis and risk the Lufthansa Group emerging from the crisis significantly weakened, according to Michael Nigman, who heads the airline's Human Resources and Legal Affairs departments. Lufthansa's supervisory board last week approved a €9 billion bailout deal from the German government. The bailout will see the government take a 20% stake in the group, with an option on a further 5% plus one share to block hostile takeovers, and that would make the federal government Lufthansa's biggest shareholder. Disneyland in California announced plans on Wednesday to reopen next month, but at significantly limited capacity and with no opportunities to hug Mickey Mouse or high-five Donald Duck for the time being. Under the plans, which still require government approval, the resort near Los Angeles, including Disneyland and Disney California Adventure, would welcome visitors back beginning July 17. When the California parks reopen, all guests will need to book reservations in advance, and social distancing measures mean no parades or nighttime spectaculars until a later date. Hotels at the site would reopen the following week under the scheme. Disneyland is the world's second most visited theme park, drawing tens of thousands of visitors each day, but it closed in mid-March due to the coronavirus concerns. The move comes on the heels of the successful reopening of Shanghai Disneyland last month and follows a similar timetable to the restart of Disney World in Florida, which has already received government approval. Robots are standing in for graduating students to receive diploma and medals at a primary school in the Philippines as the coronavirus pandemic prohibits mass gathering. Take a look.
Post-press conference, Outstanding Journalist, Academic Excellence Awardee in Communication Arts, Academic Excellence Awardee in Mathematics.
Marami ng mga umaasa na hindi na magkakaroon ng graduation, pero dahil dito sa robotic na paraan ng pag-graduation ay naging matagumpay ito. At napanood ito, sa kasalukuyan ito ay napapanood sa Taguig. Yes, kauna-unahan dahil sa ito ang hinihingi ng pagkakataon.
Kasi po, since we're advancing na nga po in this, nagiging lumalagpas na tayo in each and every generation po, we have to adapt na nga po sa kung ano po yung nangyayari sa atin. So since nga po merong pandemic, napakalaking tulong po talaga when it comes to yung technology.
For a public high school in Taguig, not even the coronavirus disease can dampen its desire to recognize the fruits of students' labor and as it held its first ever cyber graduation ceremony. This technology-based idea originated from the Taguig City Education Office and the Taguig Robotics team, a group of SRCC students that had won gold medals at international robotics tilts. The ceremony featured 4 robots made with recycled materials representing the SRCC graduating class of 2020. Mayor Lino Cayetano said the ceremony is part of Taguig Safe City initiative, which helps the city undertake its programs with minimum health standards conforming with COVID-19 protocols. All 4 robots were operated via remote control to receive the diploma in lieu of the graduate, who instead watched the proceedings with his or her family via Facebook Live. Toga-wearing robots received the diplomas on behalf of the graduates, and the live videos of the graduates were projected on the heads of the robots as their names were called to claim their diplomas. And as the coronavirus bans wreak havoc on school-leaving events, one Bahrain school has honored its seniors with a drive-through graduation ceremony, complete with fireworks at the kingdom's Formula One circuit. Take a look. In rows of well-paced vehicles, students and their families lined up In front of the main podium of Bahrain International Circuit, where Grand Prix races are held, this year's race was postponed as the pandemic threw the racing calendar into chaos, but the venue was repurposed to bid farewell to the Bahrain Bayan School graduates. One by one, the 82 seniors, dressed in traditional gowns and caps with the new addition of face masks, left their car to receive their degrees to the backing of shouts of encouragement from their relatives. Before reaching the podium, they passed through a sterilization gate and then they waited in socially distanced marked bays before greeting the school principal from a 2-meter distance and then briefly taking off their mask for a photo. Families still in the cars waved the Gulf Kingdom's national flag and held placards congratulating their offspring before fireworks lit up the sky in a finale. Bahrain, with a population of some 1.5 million, half of them expats, has reported more than 16,000 coronavirus cases, including 12 deaths. And Italian police said they had retrieved a work by famed street artist Banksy commemorating the victims of the November 2015 Paris terror attack, stolen from the Bataclan concert hall. Take a look. Now, the work was an image of a girl in mourning painted on one of the emergency doors of the Parisian venue where Islamic State gunmen massacred 90 people. It had been cut out and taken in 2019. The work was found in an abandoned farmhouse in Abruzzo, according to L'Aquila prosecutor Michelle Benzo, who said further details would be provided. The portion of the Bataclan door is not the only Banksy to have been stolen from Paris. In 2018, the artist blitzed the French capital with murals during a whirlwind trip, which he said was to mark the 50th anniversary of the Paris student uprising of 1968. After he appeared to authenticate 8 of the Paris works on his Instagram account, it did not take long for thieves to strike. Work stolen included a mural of a businessman in a suit offering a dog of bone, having just sawed the animal's legs off, and another was an image of a masked rat wielding a box cutter, which disappeared from outside the Pompidou Center. Banksy took on the rat as his avatar, a symbol of the vilified and downtrodden, in homage to Paris street artist Black Lerat. Black started out in 1968 when a general strike by students and workers brought France to a halt. Now, some of the stolen works have since been recovered, and fans have recovered some of his Paris street art with plexiglass to protect them. Banksy is believed to have started out as a graffiti artist in London, although he has kept his identity a secret. Works by Banksy, known for their distinctive style, irreverent humor, and thought-provoking themes, have been found on walls, buildings, and bridges from the West Bank to post-Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans. At auction, they have sold for more than $1 million. And before we close, we leave you with a word of hope. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. See you again tomorrow evening. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.
This program was brought to you by SMC Infrastructure, building a better world.